Our survival on this planet is not guaranteed. If we don't wake up, catastrophe is coming. The American dream is the dream of possibility. Wealth creation is just one aspect. If we see wealth creation as the primary factor, then we are compromised ethically. We're not a stupid species. We know better than to think there's not a deep lovelessness that all of us are capable of. If you don't meditate, pray, do some kind of mindfulness practice, you're taking yesterday's stress into the day. Laziness, procrastination, those things that just weaken you as a person and keeping you from victory in your life and transcendence in your life. It takes discipline to be present. Ultimately, love always prevails. The only question is how much suffering we cause ourselves first.
They say that the human race is doomed, that we have lost touch with our true nature, that the media has corrupted us, and that the planet has no future. I disagree. I believe that humanity is full of hope, and that our salvation lies within each one of us. My name is Brian Rose, and my job is to listen, the oldest method of learning known to man. Each week I seek out individuals that are changing the world, people who are living and thinking in a different way. Their stories will challenge your beliefs, make you question your choices, and perhaps inspire you to change. I never planned on doing any of this, but now I can't stop. Join me on this mission and make humanity something we can all be proud of.
It's time for you to man up, to once and for all tell your mind who the fuck is boss. I need a fucking answer. What's it gonna be? I don't know what it is about this fucking sport, but it attracts people that really need to do deep work on themselves.
I failed in this city. All these bad memories. I never really felt like I gave a fuck about me or my life. I almost killed myself, like.
Think about something that is going to drive you when it really hurts. Some kind of demon you want to fight.
This is not Pussy Man, this is Iron Man. Under pressure reveals true character. What are you gonna do? You gonna be in Chattanooga, May 20th or what?
My favorite quote from Marianne Williamson is this: "Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate, it is that we are powerful beyond all measure." She's all about getting you to push yourself, go inside, take extreme ownership. She's all about a daily spiritual and mental practice that'll help you be the best version of yourself. She's OG original gangster when it comes to proper spirituality, and she's on a mission these days with her Love America tour and looking at politics through the lens of actually ourselves and looking at what we need to do differently to change the global conversation. I always love my time with her. She's so present with me and so real. I know you're gonna enjoy this conversation. And inside London Real Academy, we're getting real because I'm gonna show you how to take your passion and turn it into a revenue-generating business within 8 weeks, guaranteed. I push you to go into the fear, get out there, and change the world by doing what you love. Here's a little bit more about what we do inside.
London Real doesn't stop when the conversation ends. You see, that's when we get started. Because everything begins with a thought, and then comes the action. The London Real Academy is our global transformation platform. Here we bring together thousands of students from over 75 countries. Whether you want to build a profitable business from your passion, or learn to speak to inspire, or broadcast yourself with your very own podcast, or accelerate your life to become a high-performance person, we have the online accountability course and personal mentoring program that will make your dream a reality. Join us, and we'll take your life to the next level, together. Our next accelerator course is starting soon.
This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Marianne Williamson, the American spiritual teacher, lecturer, and author of 7 New York Times bestselling books, including A Return to Love, Reflections on the Principles of A Course in Miracles. This year, you are traveling the USA on the Love America Tour, a direct response to the current political climate. Here you discuss how a revolution in consciousness will bring renewal, urging all Americans to return to our deepest value, love. Marianne, welcome back to London Real.
Thank you so much for having me back.
It's great having you here. What brings you back to London? Why are you in Europe? What's going on with you lately?
Well, my daughter lives in London, so I enjoy visiting for that reason, and while I'm here, I often speak. I spoke this week for Alternatives over at Logan Hall, and I spoke in Paris this week as well. When I come back in October, I'll be going also and speaking in Switzerland and in Spain, as well as in London again. So I enjoy that, obviously.
You're always very busy.
I'm busy.
Well, why are you always busy, always traveling? I mean, I just see so much of you out there.
Well, in terms of my life and how I live my life, it's not like I don't take rest time. It's not like I don't spend what I think of as an appropriate amount of time in reflection and solitude that I think is necessary for any well-lived life. You know, Blaise Pascal said every problem in the world can be traced to man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone. So I understand how important it is that you not always be out there doing it. That yin and yang is important, and it's important to me. So, you know, you don't see it necessarily on my website, and today she's just at home alone, you know, but those days exist.
Yeah, most definitely. You were here 2.5 years ago. A lot's changed since then. What have the last 2.5 years been like for you, for your country, my country too, for the world? I mean, if you had to kind of sum things up, what's been happening?
Obviously, we're in a time of great change. Certainly in my country, I think it's a time of crisis. Our democracy itself is being shaken to its core. There's no guarantee that our democracy will survive this intact, but I believe that it will. But that's true of the human race. There's no guarantee that we will survive our own self-destructiveness, but I believe that we will. I think that the very fact, though, that there is such peril globally in terms of environmental issues and also in terms of our individual countries, in terms of environmental, political, social, economic issues, the same thing being played out domestically as is being played out internationally, has also, I think, caused a kind of awakening. Certainly in the United States it has. Winston Churchill is to have said that you can always count on Americans to do the right thing after they have exhausted every other option. And often Americans are slow to wake up. Everybody in the world, except us sometimes, seems to know this. But I think it's also true, and I think others in the world know this as well, that when we do wake up, we slam it like nobody's business. And I believe that's going to happen here. We're going through a period of crisis, but I think it's awakened a lot of people. We have midterm elections in November, and I think we're going to show ourselves and the rest of the world who we are.
You did a TED Talk recently called The New American Story. Can you talk about what that story is and why did you
decide to start talking about that now?
I think that if you pick up a novel and you just start reading it in the middle of the novel, you can't possibly understand the plot. You don't know who the characters are. You don't know how they fit into the narrative. And when you don't know your history, this is why we go to therapy. Who are your parents? What's your family history? You get a deeper understanding of yourself. And this is why a nation, in order to understand itself deeply, needs to understand its history. Well, in America, I think one of the core issues that has led to the crisis that we're in has been a failure on the part of the American education system to educate people about civics and history the way we need to be in order to be responsible for our democracy and for our country. And I think a lot of Americans need to be reminded of our story. Many people in the United States think it's all rah-rah, America's great, have no listening for the terrible mistakes that we've made in our nation's history and that we're making now. But other people only want to focus on the terrible things that have happened and have no listening, or are happening, and have no listening for the good things we've done. We're a decent people. You know, all that a nation is a group of individuals. Individuals are, you know, there's a darkness in here, there's a light in here. So America has always been this tension. On the one hand, we were established on the most enlightened principles that have ever been foundational to the beginning of a nation. At the same time, 41 signers of the Declaration of Independence, which was a majority of them, were themselves slave owners. So from the very beginning, we've been this tension between these enlightened principles on which we purport to stand and the fact that we have often been the greatest transgressor against those principles. Slavery, genocide of Native Americans, institutionalized white supremacy, segregation, denial of rights to gay Americans, denial of rights to women, oppression of women. But I think it's important as it is to identify those things, it is equally important to identify with those who solved those problems. So yeah, we had slavery and we had abolition. We had the denial of rights to women and we had waves of feminism and women's suffrage. We had institutionalized white supremacy and segregation, and we had the civil rights movement. We had the denial of rights to gay people, and we had the human rights campaign and the marriage equality movement. So I think that it's important right now for us to hold, that's what this time demands, is deep thinkers, mature thinkers, who can hold that juxtaposition. And I believe in the United States what we need is for us as a generation to know this is a larger narrative, it's a continuing narrative, that our political history is one in which generation after generation, there has been this struggle, there has been this tension between those who have taken very seriously the principles on which we stand, the possibilities for self-actualization that are afforded by a democracy, the significance of that, not just to our country, but to humanity. And there have been those who would actually decrease our national commitment to those principles and would really have a sort of what has happened, subconsciously revert to basically what is an aristocratic paradigm, where opportunity and wealth and resources of various kinds are basically held in the hands of the very few at the expense of the many. This is an assault on the foundation of democracy. What I think is important for Americans to know right now, it seems to me, is that this is not the first time we've had this struggle. But let's not be the first generation to wimp out on doing what it takes to put this country back on track. We've swerved before. We've swerved from democratic principles before in all the instances that I stated. And American capitalism has not always been centered in its own ethical meaning. So this is not the first time American capitalism has had a few things to answer for. But the point is, over time, as Churchill was saying, we do tend to self-correct. And we're living at one of those times where the challenge to American citizenry is to self-correct, because we have taken a swerve. We've taken a serious swerve. But our history and our legacy shows that at times when this has happened before, Americans rose up and did what it took to get us back on track, and I believe that we will again.
Can you tell me how you felt when Trump was elected and maybe the few months after that? And I know it's simplifying it, but you know, is he a reflection of us in some way, or of this part of our American story?
Well, as much as anything else, I think that the Trump phenomenon is a reflection of the fact that too many Americans have chosen to be disengaged from the political process. This did not come out of nowhere. There have been too many layers, years, election cycles, where some of the best and the brightest in America just kind of checked out from the political process. And you know, as the French say, if you don't do politics, politics will do you. Well, it's done us now. So I think, as I said before, a lot of people have woken up. A lot of people were in deep shock. I was not in deep surprise. I think many people were more concerned. And I was one of them, because I knew that millions of Americans were living, and had been living for a long time, in deep economic despair. And there were only two major candidates who really spoke to that. So I felt there was going to be a cry of despair that would result in a kind of populist revolution of sorts. The only question was whether it was going to be an authoritarian populism or a progressive populism. It was a kind of perfect storm, the 2016 election. But once again, we're way too close to the cliff, but we haven't fallen over yet. And I believe in the midterms in 2018, and certainly in the presidential race of 2020, Americans are going to lay it down and put this country, my country, back on track.
You know, last time we talked about Trump, and it was, you know, early 2016, so, you know, we didn't really know what was going to happen yet. And you said he has a realness that's obvious that people are drawn to, where the politicians, they never give us that. And you were already kind of identifying that, okay, there's something going on that people are engaging with. And
you know, there's an authenticity there, but you know, I don't, you know, if somebody's authentically something that none of us would respect, I don't see where we should respect the authenticity. But I do think that he has created both the possibility as well as the necessity of breaking out of some old patterns. I think some grenades had to be thrown into the system, but he's thrown grenades into places that should not be bombed. And it's very disturbing to see some of the threats to not only traditional norms, but some traditional norms we should be proud of. They are the norms of democracy, freedom of the press, respect for the vote itself. So we're in mid-crisis, and pray for us.
Has politics turned into kind of a celebrity contest? I mean, is this never going back the other way, where it's going to be about the headlines and the Twitter followers?
Well, I hope not. You know, when I was a child, the same company was not allowed to own the television station and the radio station and the newspaper, because there was a far greater respect and an understanding of the need for diversification in the media and the diversification of opinions. Those firewalls that kept sales from journalistic responsibility fell down in the 80s and the 90s, and now you have this corporate conglomeration. The media in America, looking back at the 2016 election, many in the mainstream media know that they have blood on their hands, know that they treated this like a joke, like it was a clown, like a carnival barker. Did not treat this seriously in the way it should have been. Thought they were covering a horse race that was almost funny.
And profitable.
And profitable. That's exactly right. Because early in the campaign, in the primary season, Bernie Sanders had as many people at his rallies as Donald Trump had at his. But it was this wall-to-wall coverage. I do think that the American media realizes the depth of its irresponsibility, and I believe in many ways is trying to make up for that now. There is a seriousness in the air, but now, what was the actual question? Because now I can't remember the bottom line question.
It's just kind of like the celebrity, you know?
Yeah.
Is it about headlines and Twitter followers, and do we want to see celebs and not politicians?
Well, the social media aspect, of course, and this isn't any more true of the United States than it is of England or anywhere else. This social media, it's the whole invention of the internet, I think will one day be looked back on as fundamentally transformative as the invention of the printing press. It has changed everything. It's not just the dissemination of information, it's how we process information. So, and it's like a Wild West out there. But I think that there is the stirrings of an awakening, not just in my country, all over the world, that if we're not careful, this will continue to eat away at some very precious aspects of our humanity. It's sucking some life force out of us when we're not even talking to each other so much as we're talking to a screen. And when our children are growing up, counting clicks and being concerned about how many clicks they got more than goodness and ethics and personal impeccability and nobility and wisdom, when those just become quaint, almost peripheral issues. But I think there's a sense among many people that something's gone too far. And I've had personal crises, most of us have. We've talked. If you survive it, you're more noble on the other side. You're more compassionate on the other side. You're more humble on the other side. You're more responsible on the other side. And I think that that's true of a nation as much as for an individual. I think Americans are a decent people. We're all decent people. I think America has shadows that we should not be proud of. But like I said, we have a legacy of owning our mistakes in the past. And I think there are many people in the United States working very hard to do that now. We have terrible issues with wealth inequality. We have terrible issues with criminal justice, mass incarceration. We have terrible issues with racial justice in the United States. Environmental issues, political issues, obviously. But this race for the best of ourselves, this contest for the best of ourselves, is far from over.
You're pretty fired up in that TED Talk. You know, you're very passionate.
Also, you mentioned earlier your sister lives in Berkeley, so I'm sure you know you have a lot of permission in Berkeley, California, to lay it down the way you see it.
Even a duty maybe in Berkeley. But you know, you're passionate about this, and you know, Love America tour is you know, it embodies that passion. Where did this come from? When did you think, okay, I'm going to do this, I've got to do this, and what is it?
I think love of one's country, whether it's the country of your birth or the country of your adopted homeland, is an important part of righteous living. Who are you if you don't stand on principles? What does life mean if we don't stand for something? And I think that's true of a nation as much as it is true of an individual. A nation has to stand for something. Great Britain stands for something. The United States stands for something. These countries matter. I mean, all countries matter. But when you're talking about advanced democracies and the profound responsibility to the rest of the world, that's the problem with a society in which we've all become assaulted 24 hours a day by ultimately unimportant things. As soon as you have to say, whoa, what's really important? You know, Martin Luther King is to have said, your life begins to end on the day you stop talking about things that matter. And nobody can determine for you whether or not you choose to live a life based on important things. And if what's happening, if you're an American and you're not dealing with what's happening in our country today, who are you? I mean, really?
Trying to get people to re-engage.
Well, I'm not trying to get anyone to do anything. I don't see that as my
important.
job. I don't think of I never think of myself as trying to get a message out. I'm trying to get a message in. I don't think that I'm any more fired up than everybody else I know. I'm just fired up when the camera's on and the lights are on, maybe a little more often than many people. But the fire in my belly is the fire in the belly of millions of people in the United States today. I don't have anything special, going on. I'm not going to be quiet.
And what is this tour? Like, what happens on it?
Well, what happened for me, as for many people, I felt that in the 2016 election, fear and bigotry and some of the worst aspects of the American character had been harnessed for political purposes. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody voted for Trump was coming from that place. I don't believe that. But I do believe that he did harness those things for political purposes. But that's not the American that I know. And I know a loving America. I know a decent America. I know a creative America. The issue is that the worst of our national character has been harnessed for political purposes, and the best of our national character needs to be harnessed for political purposes. And a conversation harnesses energy. As you know, that's what your show is. You take a conversation and you have it publicly, and the molecules change. It becomes a field. It's more than just words. It becomes a container. Other people join their thoughts. Other people can think about the things you talk about. There might be a yes that they have around it. They might have a no. But it's a meaningful conversation, right? And I would think with this program, the value is in the conversation. Not that you're trying to get anyone to think this way or to think that way, but just can we all think more deeply, please? Because I believe in people. I believe in the wisdom of people. And that's really the founding of my country, was based on the idea that the governance of a great nation could be placed in the hands of the average person, who, if the average person has education of their critical thought processes and a free press and free speech, so that there's an exchange of information, that they can be relied upon to govern a great nation. And that's the democratic principle that is now at the core of all the great democracies. Yeah. But when the TV's on all the time, the social media is going all the time, we're missing out on something that you've dedicated your professional life to, and that I've dedicated my professional life to. The power of a conversation about things that matter, things that are real, that is just human beings talking. And that gets to the root of things. What's happening a lot with our politics, certainly in the United States, is people are trying to take a withered plant, which is our democracy, and bring it back to life by watering the leaves. I think you need to water the roots. And that has to do with how human beings feel and what human beings are thinking. And it's not that anyone has a monopoly on truth. I don't. Who does? But just the sharing of information, having the conversation. I remember Werner Erhard, the founder of EST, said, you can live your life out of circumstances, or you can live your life out of a vision. And when circumstances are bleak, it's very important to have a vision of possibility that lies on the other side of that. That's what the abolitionists had. Here was slavery, but they had a vision of abolition. Women who had no rights, no legal right to vote or to own property of their own. But there was the vision of suffrage, there was the vision of feminism. Institutionalized white supremacy and segregation, but there was a vision of an American South that was not in the grip of white supremacy. You always have to have a vision of what's possible on the other side of dire circumstances. And you by articulating the vision, you forge the synapses You forge a kind of ideational container into which we can pour our energies to co-create, that allows us to co-create, to invoke that possibility. And I think that's what we need now. We're, in many of our countries, we've been relatively spoiled. We haven't had to struggle. What we wanted came pretty easy. So I felt in the United States that our musculature, the musculature that enables us to stand up and say, no, we're not going there. We're going there. We're not doing that authoritarian thing. We're a democracy. The problem is not just the threats to our democracy. The problem is not just an authoritarian impulse. The problem is the cynicism, which is just an excuse for not helping, and the kind of weariness, and I'm too traumatized to deal with this. No, 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 no. No, you think the people who walked across the bridge in Selma were not traumatized? That's what we need now, is the strength of character to respond to our circumstances. So the problem is not just the circumstances. The problem is when we fail to respond. That's what responsibility means. And I think having a deeper conversation about these things helps to harness those energies. Whether it's an individual going through a crisis, I mean, where would we be without the people who gave us a good talking to when we were down?
And you ask people to kind of look inside themselves, whereas a lot of people, you know, in this political environment are like, look at this, and this is wrong, and this is wrong. But you've always asked people to look inside themselves, right?
Well, everything going on out there is a product of what's going on in here.
That's hard to explain to people, though, right?
Well, I think it's pretty obvious, though, once you look at it. I don't so much explain it to people. I just point out what I believe is obvious. As I said before, this crisis we're going through in American democracy would not have happened had so many of us not been looking the other way for a very long time. Can you leave your house, the doors unlocked and the windows unlocked for a long, long time and expect a thief not to enter? You know, you have to take care of your health. You have to proactively take care of your health. You can't just wait for not take care of your health, not take care of your nutrition, not take care of exercise, not take care of the things that proactively cultivate health, and then just hope when the inevitable illness comes that you can, through external remedies, allopathic means, suppress and eradicate all the symptoms. We're learning that now about democracy. We're learning about peace. You have to cultivate democracy. If you don't proactively cultivate your democracy, why are you so shocked when undemocratic forces are all of a sudden eating at it? And I think that's what people realize. I believe that America will get to the other side of this, but we're going to have to be different people. We're going to have to include citizenship as part of simply what we think it means to be a responsible, mature adult, and I think we have to have a greater dedication to being responsible, mature adults, or this kind of thing will happen again. So this is a time of great personal transformation, as well as political transformation. If it is not a time of personal transformation, rethinking, thinking deeply about the part that all of us might have played in whatever way, thinking about the ethical transgressions, the compromise with public morality that is as important as compromises with private morality that led to all this, our making of money a kind of false god, are looking at corporate profits like they're the be-all and the end-all of what it means to form a good society as opposed to the health and welfare of our own children. If we don't take on those deeper questions, then even if we quote-unquote fix things on the outside, these symptoms, just like with disease, will just morph and they'll be back around again.
Yeah, let's talk about that worship of money. I mean, I had my own struggles with that. I was in banking for 40 years and following that, what I called the American dream. I just, as a kid, I was always taught that that was it. The money is when you got the respect and everything was solved. And I went down a really dark, deep hole. And yet the country was kind of founded on that, and go west, young man. And it, you know, okay, not founded on that, but it was this place where that's what people did. They built fortunes. And, you know, Trump being elected was kind of a weird byproduct of the vision of that, or a symptom.
Because the irony there is we don't have his tax returns. We don't even know.
Right.
We don't even know.
The further irony is, it's this the image of that.
Yeah.
And so,
Definitely.
I always, can you ever separate America from that?
Well, yes, because the fact is that America was not, that has never been the American dream. That is a distortion of the idea of the American dream.
Yes.
The American dream is the dream of possibility. It's the dream of human possibility, that we can create a society in which the vast majority of people, and ultimately the hope is all people, are unshackled by material conditions that would otherwise keep them from being able to embody and manifest their God-given potential. That is the American dream. Now, part of our ability to soar and to manifest our God-given potential is the ability to create wealth. But wealth creation is just one aspect of the manifestation of the higher possibilities of our humanity. And if we see wealth creation in the terms of money as the primary factor in the manifestation of our greatness, then we are compromised ethically. That is not the American dream. And I'm glad that I was not brought up with that. I was, you know, there's nothing holy about what happens when money stops circulating. I was brought up, I think, with a very healthy attitude towards money. I've been very blessed by the free market system. I've been very privileged. I've sold a few books. I'm an entrepreneur. I have online classes and seminars and all of that. The beauty of, I'm very aware viscerally of the beauty of the free market when you're in that club. The problem in America today is not enough people can get into it. If you have children who by the age of 8 already can't read because they were so failed by the American public education system, then you have prison builders who know that it is statistically a good economic investment to go on and build a prison bed, because that's the trajectory of probability for that child. That's immoral. That's what I meant before about public moral issues. So I think that while we have an entrepreneurial spirit in the United States, and we love that. You want to see entrepreneurialism, you want to see creativity, you want to see the can-do spirit, look at any American kindergarten, or any kindergarten anywhere, Great Britain, anywhere else. But the point is, if you do not, particularly by the way, in a child before the age of 8, if you do not cultivate the opportunities, not just of education as we think of it, like just intellectual, but the social and the emotional and the cultural and the artistic, the aesthetic, all the things which lead to the full flowering of a human being. If you don't take care of that in the life of a child, then the child is not given the opportunity to be all that they can be. So what has happened in the United States over the last few decades is that the vast majority of our material resources have been funneled off, siphoned off, whether it is opportunity for wealth creation, opportunity for education, opportunity for health care, opportunity for all the things which diminish economic and personal anxiety, without which nobody can flower, into the hands of fewer and fewer people. And Louis Brandeis, the late Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis, said, you can have large amounts of money concentrated in the hands of a very few, or you can have democracy. You cannot have both. Our country was founded in repudiation of the aristocratic monarchical system. That was the whole point, that God did not, you know, when we were kids, we read about the divine right of kings. Well, the idea of the founding of American democracy was the idea, and this is the American dream, that God created all men equal, and that God gave all men inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, whether in a country like England, where it was a gradual transformation into a democracy, or in the case of the United States, an actual revolutionary overthrow of the aristocratic system, the point is, that's where history has taken us. And in the United States, in ways that are very concerning to many of us, we seem to be heading backwards. Once again, though, this story's not over.
Right, right, and we will push through this.
We will push through
Okay.
this.
Tell me about race. I mean, I was just in Chattanooga, Tennessee.
Yes.
And I ran the Ironman race, and I cycled through big parts of Georgia, which was the Deep South. Recently I watched a documentary on Bob Kennedy on Netflix, and it showed 1968 and all of this massive turmoil and the civil rights movement and what was going on with Martin Luther King. And then we kind of see the state of the art today. Maybe it's embodied by the This Is America video, you know, something very powerful that's showing that, wow, there's some major problems still going on here. And that's tracking 100 years later and 50 years later. And, you know, where are we at today? And what conversations do we need to have to move forward? You know, when people ask me, like, what's going on with America, I kind of used to say what you're saying now. It's like, there's a really long story here, and it's really complicated.
Yeah.
And some of my crew went down there and they looked at it and they were like, well, this isn't what I thought it was going to be. Everyone was really nice and I saw this, but there's all sorts, there's an old story there, right?
Yeah. Well, it's a story that is not completed. In the 1960s, there was a civil rights movement. There was a great impulse towards healing. In 1968, Richard Nixon was elected president. And there was a senator from New York, who at that time I don't think was a senator yet, but he worked in the Nixon administration, I think. Anyway, his name was Patrick Moynihan, and he had a term, benign neglect, and that's what he recommended to Nixon as where we should go with race relations at that time. Just kind of like let that one sit for a while. And what started to happen slowly but surely is that we moved backwards. By the 1990s, with the rather draconian sentencing laws, we had the beginning of mass incarceration. We now have more black men in prison than we had enslaved in 1864. We have terrible racial disparity in our sentencing. For instance, we know that blacks and whites do drugs roughly the same rate, but blacks are punished at much more severely than whites are, and you don't have police going through white neighborhoods checking on to see if there are drugs. Recently, in the last few years, the Supreme Court has struck down some aspects of the Voting Rights Act, which was core to the civil rights legislation that was passed after the death of Dr. Martin Luther King. And he said, well, we don't, you know, the Supreme Court said we don't need that protection of voting rights for African Americans anymore because the South is different. And of course, as soon as those parts of the law were struck down, state after state started initiating what are essentially voter suppression projects that we're dealing with today. If Lincoln had lived, I believe things would have been different. You know, everybody knows in the second inaugural, with malice towards none, with charity for all. He saw the American South. He didn't want to treat the South as a vanquished enemy. He wanted to treat the American South as a family member that had come back home. His successor, after he was assassinated, the vice president, was Andrew Johnson, who was a Southern sympathizer. It was after the Civil War that things like the Ku Klux Klan were instituted. Now, you were talking before about external versus internal remedy. So the stroke of a presidential pen on the Emancipation Proclamation and the 13th and 14th Amendment could abolish an evil institution, a racist institution of slavery, but those external remedies could not abolish racism.
Sure.
So in a very real way, racism burrowed even more deeply into the Southern psyche after the Civil War. Then you had American troops, federal troops, that remained until 1877 to make sure that slavery itself was not reinstituted. And as soon as those troops left, you had this emergence. They couldn't reinstate the external institution of slavery, but the Jim Crow laws, the lynchings, etc. And that white supremacy, that horribly institutionalized white supremacy throughout the American South, was not challenged until the Civil Rights Movement.
Right.
So it's a relationship that has never been completed. Now, interestingly enough, there were reparations promised at the time, 40 acres and a mule. And right after the war, some former slaves received that acreage, and then it was taken away from them during that period of Reconstruction, etc. I'm aware, you know, I'm a Jew, and I'm aware that after World War II, Germany did full mea culpa, not kind of sort of mea culpa. Not, well, it wasn't me, it was my, you know, it wasn't me. And that included roughly $89 billion of reparations to Jewish organizations. By the 20th century, the idea of reparations was considered simply a civilized notion. You can't undo the Holocaust, you can't undo slavery, but it is a civilized notion to seek to make financial recompense to a wronged people. And so I hope that the conversation of reparations will become considered much less fringe in the United States, because it should. $100 billion, $200 billion, which once again is a fraction. We spend $700 billion every year on the military defense. To say to an esteemed council of African American leaders and scholars and so forth, over the next 10 years or 20 years, whatever's worked out, spend this money in forms of economic and social revitalization, however you choose.
Who do you compensate? The African leaders or the people themselves?
Oh, well, it would be a council of African American elders, as it were.
I never really heard that conversation happen.
Because it has been, for the most part, kept within pockets of African American society. I think it very much needs to burst out of African American society, and that's why I'm saying it right now.
Okay, it feels like that's coming. I mean, I remember when I first came to London, Swiss Bank finally made a settlement.
Thank you.
For holding money, from
that's exactly my
from
point.
the Jewish population in World War II, and I was like, wow, that's 50 years later, and they're doing the cutting the check.
Exactly, exactly, because it is understood and accepted that this needs to be handled. When you're talking about 200-300 years of slavery, you're talking about building the entire economy of the American South. It was built on slavery.